If you're familiar with Rareware's famed track record of cutesy-leaning animal mascot games like Donkey Kong Country, Battletoads, and Banjo-Kazooie, it may surprise you to learn that on the darker end of their repertoire is Killer Instinct, a fighting game that may have grown to be a bit niche, but at a time rivaled Mortal Kombat, combining its aforementioned contemporaries' 2D fighting and vibe with the early 3D graphics Rare had perfected in its work with Donkey Kong. If you told someone that the same technology used to give color and shape to the Congo jungle would also be used to make a Mortal Kombat-esque fighting game, you might find the idea dubious, but the style lent itself incredibly well to this cast of pugilists in creating an overall unforgettable vibe. But if I had to describe the cast of Killer Instinct as a result of the art and graphic style, I'd describe them as looking like plastic toys, and I mean that in the best possible way. Killer Instinct surrounds the wicked megacorporation Ultratech, guilty of the proclivity of playing God in their production of genetic experiments, unholy reanimations, and cyborgs, among others. Ultratech holds the Killer Instinct tournament to test their experiments and creations against voluntary combatants who have their own motivations to fight. This duality of the fighters in Killer Instinct creates an engaging atmosphere because there's such a divide between how these battles are a mere field test for the Ultratech fighters, but for the willing external combatants there are grievous stakes. Between Chief Thunder's search for his lost brother tied to Ultratech, TJ Combo trying to reignite his destroyed boxing career using the tournament's publicity, and the freedom fighter Black Orchid trying to tear down Ultratech for the little guy they stomped down on. The fighters of Killer Instinct feel desperate. There's very little gray area between fighters who have everything on the line in the ring and fighters who are tools of Ultratech fighting for their god complex-fueled experiments and amusement. There's something eerily true to life with this in mind, that half these fighters are effectively the 99% who Ultratech could help with the wave of their hand, but spoken like a true mega-corporation, Saberwolf can't have a cure for his werewolf disease, and apprehended alien Glacius can't return home until they fight for a crowd against their perfected killer robot to make sure all of its glitches work out. This gives Killer Instinct the tone of a twisted game show almost, in which these fighters duke it out to a meaningless death for an uncaring public, all for the benefit of a conglomerate's desire to stoke their power trip. Killer Instinct's characters really are what helped the title persist, and I think that's equally owed to its distinct art style. Rare applied the same 3D graphic sprite tracing that gave Donkey Kong Country its lush look and atmosphere. But you'd think it would be a bad fit for a serious fighting game. It's certainly counterintuitive, but the graphics created a look for the characters that made them compact in stature with very smooth, defined textures, making them always invoke to me the look of small toy figures. In this way, Killer Instinct almost feels like the aftermath of emptying out your toy chest and slamming the contents together. And this is helped in no small part by each character's clear pop culture influence, meaning it's through this setting that you can finally play out your long-imagined battles between the Predator and the Human Torch. Combined with this game's story, this overall look simplifies the characters so we look at them the way Ultratech does. Ergo, when TJ Combo fights Jago, we see an epic brawl between a boxer and a ninja, but the more accurate and harsh reality is that this is a fight between a disgraced prize fighter, risking life and limb to make ends meet, and an indigenous warrior manipulated by a deity and cult he never knew anything outside of. The battles and conflicts of Killer Instinct are undeniably harrowing, but all we see are playthings to be entertained by, just as the manipulators of the in-universe tournament do. Ultratech isn't simply interested in controlling these combatants, but doing so with the past and future of combatant science too. At the end of the arcade tower, after defeating every other fighter, your last three opponents are always the same: Spinal, Fulgore, and the final boss, Idol. I feel this gauntlet perfectly represents the vile folly of Ultratech. Spinal is a reanimated warrior corpse from ages ago, showing the capital desire to appropriate, improve upon, and reintegrate the past. Fulgore is an advanced cyborg, standing for a dangerous and unpredictable future that technological progress represents. And the final boss, Idol, is a demon from another dimension used as a final opponent for the tournament, showing a desire to pull from the unknown and incredibly dangerous. These are all forces Ultratech feels it can control by playing God, and it's by tearing down these foes that the player proves them wrong. This is expanded upon further in Killer Instinct 2, in which the events of the first game cause its remaining fighters to be pulled through a time warp by Idol's explosive death, throwing the handful of survivors into a long bygone era. Suddenly, ideals of the future and modern strength are put to the test, as killer robots and secret agents have to contend with unforgiving, primitive environments and opponents. I I feel the character who best represents this shift is Tusk, a Conan-esque warrior who calls the past his home. And while Ultratech made boasting of their advancements and purloining of fighting methods from the past and future, Tusk represents the sheer power of a native and emblem of the past. A brick shithouse of a man with nothing but his sword to do battle with, and frankly, he's the warrior to fear as opposed to Spinal and Fulgor in the previous installment, because he's in his element, not plucked or modified, and that gives him an inherent advantage. I also love his parallel to TJ Combo as a champion of a coliseum of his own era, in which he fights TJ for the title that parallels TJ's own boxing career, showing how much has changed and yet stayed the same as far as our pleasure in brutal gladiatorial sport. Like a lot of rare properties after they were bought out by Microsoft, Killer Instinct was largely silenced after the 90s, until the game had its reboot in 2013, which gave a more realism-centered coat of paint to the universe. And I kind of hate that I don't just love it. I think it's clear an insane amount of work and artistic vision went into bringing these characters to the modern age. But intense realism is never what I really wanted out of these characters, and exploring the appeal of the old Killer Instinct games, and how they didn't take themselves so seriously despite some grim subject matter and how that spoke to the characters, it gave me a better understanding as to why. It feels like you took the toys and added a ton of detail no one asked for. I don't feel like I can hold the cold plastic of these characters in my hand the way I did in the old days. I just didn't need Saberwolf to have a bunch of jewelry and bells and whistles, or Riptor to have cybernetic enhancements. Look at the fatalities of the first two Killer Instinct games. They're more about being curt and funny than anything else, whereas the new games take themselves so seriously. And since Killer Instinct doesn't necessarily do buckets of blood, they just come off as overly elaborate and a little lame to me. I like the Jago who meditates until a car falls on his foe way more than the Jago who does a big combo leading into some great value spirit bomb. I'm very alone in this opinion. The new Killer Instinct is a big part of the current esports scene, and I haven't seen anyone else really complain about the redesigns the way I do, and that's utterly valid, it's just my opinion. I certainly don't think Killer Instinct 2013 is a bad game or anything like that. That said, I do think the dissonance between it and its predecessors speaks to the atmosphere that I loved in the first couple games, and I think that has value in of itself. I don't think it's really practical to wish technology backwards either. It was very specific animation techniques and circumstances that led to the first Killer Instinct games looking the way they did. And rather than lust for a return to the past, it's okay to look at it as a fun time capsule of that era of arcade fighters as well. Killer Instinct's art, characters, and overall vibe bundled together to make an ultra combo of powerful assets, and I think it is a great lightning in a bottle capturing of 90s arcade vibe.